1970, I traveled overland from Europe to India. Went through Afghanistan before the Russian war. It wasn't before the Afghan war, because Afghanistan has been war for a long time. All the way back to Alexander the sociopath, who went east and left a trail of carnage behind him. Anyway, I have an incredible picture somewhere in my pictures of an Afghan man, 6'2". The Afghans are not small people. 6'2", carrying a rifle, wearing his long sleeves, and walking down the streets of Herat with a rose. It's a gorgeous picture. So I was out in the garden for a few moments, and I took a whiff of this rose, and I was aware of smelling. And on the in-breath, where the molecules of rose are going across the nose membranes, there's scent. On the out-breath, there's none. Anicca, impermanence. Beauty, nice smell. So I wanted to pass these around just to share the extraordinary delight of them, but also to have an experiment. Maybe you do this. When it gets to you, before you even sniff it, let your eyes close and watch how sight disappears. And then bring the rose close. Present for thee. And see if you can let go of the concept rose. You first, sir. It's a bit like passing a joint in the old days, right? Hey man, good shit. You have to hold it a long time. Oh dear. That was early on in the reign of President Obama. I so liked it when the reporter asked him, "Did you inhale?" And when he said, "Well, that was the point, wasn't it?" It's a level of candor that's good. Okay. Not instructions. Announcements. The Brighton-Bush retreat is full to bursting, so I can't invite you to that. But I would like to invite you to Nelson, British Columbia in July for 12 days at a gorgeous little retreat center. It's the longest retreat I teach in each year. I'm assisted there by a dear beloved friend of mine, Don McEachern, Canadian fellow, who first came to my retreat 16 years ago or so and has proceeded to just blossom. Anyway, the shorthand for it is if you come, it'll change your life. And you'll have a contact with deeper aspects of yourself than you've ever encountered. It will probably be rather painful, almost for sure, and also extraordinarily pleasant. You'll get a glimpse of human life as you live it very clearly, and your practice will go down several notches. If you'd like further info about that, who's been on that retreat? Just the two, three. Secondly, an invitation to support your Dharma Center. This is the NPR moment. There's a bowl back there, a black bowl, which was my monk bowl in Burma back in my youth. PIMC exists solely on your generosity. And so if you're finding this place to be helpful to you, I invite you to help keep the doors open, help keep it functioning. It's lots of things one can say, but I guess that's the short form. And if you want to really be ongoingly nurturing, to do a monthly contribution, an automatic thing online, which happens when you don't come, to support this remarkable endeavor. This is a first generation Dharma center in the United States. And this is where the spore landed, blown over from Burma, and it's turned into this. And our hope and aspiration and likelihood, presuming that we continue as a species, is that we'll be here, this building will be here, and these teachings passing on 100 years from now. So Kate, would you like to do the rest of the inspirational announcements?
For inspiration, if you'd like to meet with Robert for a half an hour. He does Dharma consultations. They're free, and if you want to do that, come and see me, and I will sign you up. If you're not on the listserv, please get on the listserv. There's a board in the back with yellow sheets of paper, and you can put your name in, and I'll get you on the listserv. And if you've signed up and you haven't actually gotten an invite, would you let me know? Sometimes I miss one or I get an email wrong. Let's see, we do hospitality here, so if you'd like to join us, we have some goodies and tea and coffee after the Dharma talk today, and Jim and I and Robert will be available, or other long-standing students, if you have questions after the Dharma talk today. Glad to help out. If you'd like to volunteer, please see Laurel, who would love to put you to work. The library's going to be open today, Pat?
If you haven't seen the newly remodeled library, it's still newly remodeled.
And it's quite lovely. Jim has classes in Beaverton on Tuesday night. Doug is here on Thursday night. I'm here Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 7:30. You can join us. Can I?
And this coming Saturday, I'm going to be doing a workshop in Beaverton, half-day retreat, and then I'll be back here.
Qigong?
So it'll be Qigong and meditation.
Okay.
Combination, and that'll be the 7th, and then I'll be back here on the 14th to do the same kind of practice on a Saturday to kind of deepen our opportunity to practice.
Perfect. I think that's it.
This person is an extraordinary gift to our center, and such a help to me. Us.
I love you guys.
Yay. I was here at the center for several years alone, and then we figured out how to do it, have Kate join us, and it's the rest is history. She texted me this morning saying, "Do you remember it's first Sunday?" for the introductory session. And Jennifer, my wife, had reminded me the same thing about half an hour before, and I hadn't. So it was very good. So, do we have any questions about the first aspect of the Eightfold Path, wise understanding? Could you come get this? And this is I got this from the Buddha. It's a hand-me-down. And it works like this. If you turn and face it toward you, it's very directional, and you have to hold it quite close. And some people hate these things. Think of it as a gift you're giving to the people on the internet who get it that way, but also to those of us that are losing our hearing.
My question has to do with karma.
Karma.
Your talk was very clear, no doubt. But as the message it reveals itself over time, I've come across other teachers in their expression of the concept of karma. And so occasionally I get this message or this impression that the idea of karma is it's somewhat of a closed loop. It has to do with you and your actions, or you and your past life actions, and how they manifest themselves right now. And I have a thought that came across my mind that made me question that, and it goes like this. I thought of some of the most far afield left circumstance. Take, for example, the meteor that showed up over Russia last year. Came in over some poor, hapless city and exploded. And broken glass flying everywhere. People were injured. So let's take it from the point of view of some person who happened to be next to a window and was injured by the broken glass. And here's a meteor from millions of miles away. We didn't see it coming. How do we reconcile this idea of cause and effect with something so far out of left field? I see perhaps maybe is there more of a collective karma in play, or are we still going to say, okay, well, because of something in their past life, this is why the reality of this broken glass injuring them from an asteroid of all things?
Great, thank you. That parallels the question, it's the same question in a different way. How did 7 million Jews collude to create the Holocaust? Or how did 18 million Russians collude to get themselves killed in the Second World War? Or how did... I can't remember whether I probably did, because I usually do tell this story when I talk about karma. I'll repeat it in brief. The Buddha's away, and he comes back, and Ananda says, Lord Buddha, I've been reflecting deeply in my meditation, and I understand the law of karma. And the Buddha's response to Ananda, who'd been with him for years, decades, not so fast, Ananda. Deep, difficult to understand are these teachings on karma. So, I approach purporting to say anything about karma with caution. But I do find my understanding of the law of karma to be incredibly helpful and comforting. One can find in the Pali Canon, the Pali is the language that the teachings were written down in, not the language that the Buddha spoke, a different language in which the teachings were written down several hundred years after his death. So we have to be in charge of what meanings we take out of the teachings. We can't have the book. The book was written by the Buddha and therefore it's correct. So we have to use our intelligence and test things. This is where I land at this point. The Buddha taught about karma in a culture which was deeply steeped in a worldview that had karma and rebirth, karma and reincarnation as its foundation. And there's no way he could have said that belief, that doesn't really make sense, folks, because there's no self here to be doing that. So he taught a slightly modified, there it is, a slightly modified or radically modified view, which in that he didn't teach reincarnation, he taught rebirth. And I did the candle thing here a couple of weeks ago, but is this flame the same flame as this flame? Is this flame, and then you blow that flame out, it's light another flame, is this flame the same flame as that flame? And the answer is, it's neither the same nor is it not the same. Just as in this moment, am I the same person now or now? And, well, it's the same and not the same. So he's reported to have taught a lot of teachings that would be in keeping with the Hindu teachings of, if you're generous in this lifetime, you'll have more in the future. If you're greedy, you'll have less, and so on. Achan Brahm, we were just speaking of this lovely monk. He lives in Australia. Told us he was here and he was asking for questions, and no one had any questions. So he told this little story of karma and rebirth, and what happens if you do certain things in this lifetime, what you get in the next lifetime. And he got to the point of saying, well, and the salient point here is that if you ask a lot of questions in this lifetime, you'll be born very intelligent in the next life. Hands went up. So, the Buddha also taught that karma is much bigger than the personal. There is national karma, planetary karma. He didn't teach that, but that there are all these complex, that the forces that come to bear upon a particular moment are so extraordinarily complex. There's really no way to make sense of it. There's one way that people do make sense of it, which is as a morality teaching, which is, and it's certainly the way we teach children, which is, if you do this bad thing will happen. There will be bad consequences. So, clearly, the person in your example didn't cause that meteor to burst over their city and have cuts in their face or wherever. So, I go back to the notion of karma vipaka, action and resultance. Plant the seed and you get the fruit. Plant the seed and you get the fruit. The context, the vipaka, this moment, is so complex, there's no way we can figure it out. However, how shall I respond to this context in which I find myself? And is there something to this law of karma that I can test that will make me really want to act skillfully in this moment because I know there's going to be fruits? And that we can test, and we can test so easily. Sit and meditate. Do you feel, is your consciousness different now than it was when you walked in the room? Would it have been different in this way if you'd gone to the mall shopping? Probably not. So we can test so easily whether my action in this moment has an impact on the next moment. And so I land there with, well, I know that the actions of this moment condition the next moment and then condition the next moment. So since I know that it works in this short span, I'm going to invest a lot of life energy in trying to plant good seeds, trying to follow the precepts, trying to practice being generous, trying to practice, train the mind in concentration, train the mind in mindfulness. Because it appears to work. When I think of course, who knows whether it was the meditation or the thousands of hours of psychotherapy or body work, but the Robert Beatty of 30 years ago bears so little resemblance to the core, not the core, but there was a lot of it's the same personality, but the uptightness and anxiety and self-hatred are just gone. Not always, but mostly. Certain aspects of the neurotic mind have just attenuated to little. And I attribute that to spiritual practice and therapy and growing older, I guess. Is this making sense in terms of... So, the phone rings and we get the diagnosis from the doctor that we have a bad illness. Or a bad illness occurs to our child. Or you walk out and the car doesn't start. How shall I respond? That's the essence, the beauty of the law of karma. The Buddha called the law of karma the light of the world, which is really interesting because down the street there's a big sign that says Jesus is the light of the world. Every now and then it crosses my mind we should put up a sign, no, karma is the light of the world. But I don't think that would either reflect our values or help the neighborhood. Though, actually, if one attends to that a little more deeply, Jesus is the light of the world. If we remember what Jesus is, which is the awakened heart mind, or what that whole story represents, which is that when you take on a human birth, you climb onto the cross, and we're all on that journey, then it's true. So is that helpful with the karma? It's just so useful to me. How shall I act in this moment? And also, when my actions aren't in accord with the precepts, and then the sequelae happen, it doesn't seem so it's like, well, of course. I told that lie, and look what's happened. All right, I did this action, and so I'm missing one piece. That's good. I talked with someone yesterday whose child an adult child has received a terminal diagnosis, other than the one we all have. And this man is very Christian. And he was asking, why do bad things like this happen to good people? There's a book about that. Why do bad things happen to good people? There's another very helpful book, which is Why Do Good People Do Bad Things, which I find even more helpful. But I think the Buddha would say to that question, why do bad things happen to good people? The question is not well put. Bad things happen to everybody. And there's no making sense of bad things happening. Any one of us could not make it home today. And would it be because we were bad? Or it could be if we're speeding or something. But we just don't know. So how do we make sense of a world which is so apparently random and so out of control? The only way I know to do that is to say, I don't know. However, there's some faith that this circumstance in this moment, we could say, this circumstance in this moment is karmically just, or even that starts getting into demanding it to make sense. But this moment is as it is. How shall I respond? I find that really helpful. The one last thing about this. I've heard this from two different sources. One was a fellow I knew in Copenhagen who worked with trauma victims, torture victims, and another was as a reference in a book by the Dalai Lama. There were Tibetan monks who were captured by the Chinese and tortured. And they came out of circumstances that should have produced extreme PTSD. No PTSD. And the rationale for that, the Dalai Lama talking with his physician who was captured and tortured, and the Dalai Lama asked him, were you ever worried about yourself? And he said, well, yes, there was one day when I began to lose compassion for my torturers. And what they were saying to themselves, as I understand it, was, oh, this poor person who's torturing me, look at the karmic seeds he's planting. That's a very different perspective. But they didn't lose meaning, and they didn't wind up with PTSD. So, is that helpful? A hand. Yes, would you please use the microphone? I would jump up, but... Uh-oh. Here we are.
Thank you. So thinking about your dukkha and how it also relates to to the future seeds you're planting of that karma, wondering when you experience someone else making those unskillful choices, what you can do to heighten that compassion for that other person, to maybe help them through their dukkha, as well as where they are with their unskillful choices. How when you plant seeds of karma, it is a perpetuation of your dukkha. Is that what I'm understanding as well?
I don't understand.
Okay, I don't either. Maybe we can. Yay!
Good.
Okay.
We can try again.
Okay, let's go back. So when you're planting negative seeds or they're shadow seeds of your karma, that you're making unskilled choices that is either out of greed or selfishness, you see someone else that you care for making that, and you are trying your deepest to hold them with compassion. What skills can you give us, or tools to help build that?
To be compassionate for someone who's behaving in self-destructive or bad, who's planting bad karmic seeds.
And doesn't that relate also to our dukkha? That continuous or recognizing that the shadow? Maybe I'm off on that.
I'm good until we get to recognizing our dukkha and the shadow. Then
Okay.
it gets...
Okay, so let's just stop right there and with how we can support ourselves in building that compassion for others. Thank you, Robert.
Let me try.
That's all we can do.
So is this close? Someone is acting unskillfully. You can see it. You wish they weren't. And you want to maintain compassion for them and grow that. Is that? And assist them. When to act and not to act. Uh-huh. The Buddha had some good, remarkable guidance on when to speak and when not to speak. Is what I'm about to say true? Can I say it in a kind fashion? Is the intention for healing or connection? And is this the right moment? Is it possible that they might hear it? And if any one of these conditions are not met, don't say it. Sure leads to a lot of tongue biting. I'm about to say something. I just received an email. And I'm about to respond to it. In fact, it's written. Is it true? Is what I'm about to say really true? Is it kind? Is it coming from a kind heart? Last one. Is the intention to be helpful? What's the tone is the second one. Is the intention to be helpful? And The fourth is it the right time? Is it the right moment? And I've seen this kind of thing in my own life. I just remember Jack Kornfield was once asked, "Do you ever get angry?" And he says, "Of course, I'm married." I can't even remember the content of it, but my wife and Jennifer and I were having a testy morning, and she sent me a text, and I knew I was right. I probably was. So I quickly got a text ready, and then I realized, this is not a good message to send. And I sent it anyway. And it had the inevitable effect. I didn't hear from her till late afternoon, which is unusual, right? She was hurt. She was angry. So sometimes we pull our gun out and we just point at our foot and shoot. And that's the way we are sometimes. But I knew, this was when we did connect, I was able to say, I knew that text was inflammatory. I just sent it. It was self-destructive, and I'm sorry it hurt you. That we can take responsibility for our craziness. Because some of these patterns go deep, and we do them a lot of times before they wear out. But back to this. Is this the question? When do we intervene? When do we act? It seems important to me to differentiate when I'm acting on my needs or my fears, and when I can see the other person clearly enough and the other person's needs to actually see what needs to be done. Because acting out of my greed, hatred, and ignorance continues to the story. Funny, I don't feel super clear with this. But I'll say this. I guess we act when we think we maybe could have a positive impact, much like speech. And sometimes it's really important to refrain from acting because we know it's the wrong time, it won't be heard, it'll cause harm. What keeps coming up for me, I've had a lot of experience with addiction in my life and worked in the addictions realm for some years, and I continue to work with my I came to believe that my wandering mind was out of control and that my life had become unmanageable, and I've spent 40 years meditating in order to try to come to some kind of sanity. But when does one intervene? When a person is damaging themselves with their behavior, we intervene when we can. When we can, and in that regard, like staging an intervention with an addict, when we have the team together and when we can really confront them with, this is what I see happening, I love you, and I want you to notice this, and maybe there's a consequence. It's, I'm leaving if you don't go into treatment, or another. So interesting where do these thoughts come from? It's weird. Marion Woodman. How many of you know of Marion Woodman? She's kind of the grande dame of Jungian psychology in North America. She said in one of her books, and also in a workshop I was at, every relationship, every long-term relationship that's really alive and vibrant will have come at least once to a particular juncture where one or the other will say to the partner, sweetheart, I really love you, and I love our life together, and I'd really like it to continue, but there's this thing that has to change. Otherwise, I have to go. And I've certainly experienced that. Because otherwise, I'll have to numb myself down. And the relationship just kind of goes, bleh. Because as we grow, as we wake up, this happens to meditators with great certainty, I can say this. If you're meditating much at all, you'll start seeing things about yourself that are ego dystonic. They're not who you thought you were. And some of that will be shadow material, inevitable. Your own greediness, your own hatred, your own confusion. And sometimes we wind up reevaluating our past, and it's sometimes with a gasp. It's like, ah! Sometimes we have amends to make. We realize, whoa, I need to look up that person from 20 years ago because I really did harm there. And sometimes we can't make amends. Sometimes we have to just do it in our own hearts and forgive ourselves. But in looking inside and seeing our own shadow material, then we start noticing it in the world, and we start noticing it in our loved ones and in our friends. And it's not uncommon for friendship groups to have to shift some, and for our relationship with family members to shift, because we've changed. And this is a path of opening one's consciousness evolution. And sometimes we have to give up old friends. I was joking about the joint earlier. There was a moment in my life, a long time ago now, when it just suddenly became clear. Oh, I was at the symphony. I went with my then partner, and it was one of those days I was very spacious and open, and we parked in the parking garage and did our usual habit of toking up a little bit. No, just have a little more fun at the symphony, and the mood went from this to this. And it happened with the lights on, and there was this flash of grief, which was, oh no, this is over. I can't do this anymore. And then there was saying goodbye to that coping strategy. There was also then the beginning of psychotherapy on my depression, which had been self-medicating for a decade or more. So as we become more conscious, some things, our karma, our behaviors have to change sometimes. Who we hang out with and how we hang out. And a hand waving. I can't hear you at all, my dear. Sorry, it's what you get for waving your hand.
I just want to contribute to this conversation. Is that okay?
Sure.
So I'm not going to speak in Buddhist terms because I'm new to this, but one of the things that I do to guide me in the kind of thing you're asking about is I check in with myself. So say, for example, I'm with my daughter who's 20 years old and living her own life now, or my boyfriend, and they're acting in a way that I think is harmful. I check in with myself and I see, am I in a place of resistance to what's happening, or am I in a place of acceptance to what's happening? Nice. And if I'm in a place of acceptance, then after I've accepted it, it becomes clear then if I need to act or not act. Because a lot of times you don't need to do anything, and your loving acceptance space is kind of all a person needs sometimes. And you don't need to do anything sometimes. And then sometimes it's clear you need to maybe separate yourself or make a suggestion or an observation or something like that. But if I'm in a place of resistance, then what I'm going to do is going to be something that's not enlightened and not helpful, and it's going to perpetuate more reaction. So that's what I do to check in with myself and support people I love with compassion. I check about acceptance and resistance in myself.
Beautiful. Thank you. Right. Said the Buddha. The Buddhette. Jim. Can you run this back to Jim?
Run it back where?
To Jim in the back.
There. That Jim. This is a Jim. That's a Jim.
Oh, Jim to Jim, right.
We are Jimming. We are Jim-ing. It's a process. Wonderful thing Jim said. Spiritual understanding that you've been working with us on here, the wonderful graphics and everything, and how that leads to non-delusion about impermanence and wisdom about delusion and the whole thing. My filters are still pretty set up for the third foundation of mindfulness. The body, feeling starting to make sense to me. The fourth foundation about mind objects is starting to make sense to me. But when it comes to directing that consciousness, which is what I keep hearing, what do we do when the meteor explodes? Or what do we do when we want to deal with the reaction or some type of application of our wisdom to somebody else's unskillfulness? And the aspect of becoming about suffering, that some of it seems more optional and some of it seems to be just because we're here. Does this thing that I'm worrying over about how to direct consciousness, how does this apply to the karma vipaka and the wise understanding?
I want to pull one thing out of the middle of what you said. The suffering is what we humans add by being unable to accept the circumstance. And the core of the Buddha's teaching is that we can diminish and ultimately eliminate suffering. We can't diminish or eliminate pain because we're in a human body and there's going to be a ton of pain before we're done. But do we stick in the second arrow? There's the first arrow, which is life. There's the toothache. The second arrow is, I don't want a toothache. And that's the one that we can really do something about through the development of mindfulness. And see if this pertains to what you're saying. When I practice mindfulness and concentration and patience and renunciation and compassion, all these attributes, attitudes of mind, elements of mind, as I practice them on small things, this breath, this pain in my leg, this itch in my cheek, the habit develops of moving into that position of observation with compassion, love, generosity, patience. And that habit becomes stronger and stronger and stronger, and it develops as life rolls bigger bowling balls down the pipe at us. We discover we can still stay in our position of non-judgmental witnessing compassion. And so it's a very graduated, well, it's not always graduated. I was going to say it's a very graduated course because we never know when that monstrous Temple of Doom style boulder is going to come rolling down the pipe. The phone rings and suddenly you're in hell, right? Is that speaking to what you were asking?
It is, and it seems to be that this is the third foundation of mindfulness, of developing consciousness. What if that phone call, for me, that was 23 years ago, that phone call, and I didn't become aware of what I had experienced, that giant bowling ball, until relatively recently. And so in the directing of the third...
Let me interrupt you because I think I finally got it.
Okay, because I'm not sure I got the question that I'm trying to ask yet.
Well, And stay tuned, because you haven't been around when I've been talking about mindfulness. Mindfulness is this mysterious capacity of awareness. In the Satipatthana Sutra, the four foundations, or the four pastures, the four abidings of mindfulness, with awareness, with mindfulness, we attend to the body. With awareness, we attend to the pleasant, unpleasant, and indeterminate. With awareness, we attend to whether this is a consciousness which is expansive or contracted, or we're not using that. You're misunderstanding the four foundations. We're paying attention to, sometimes the consciousness is so spacious and lovely, and other times it's like, and that's just how it is. Today I feel so confident and certain and yes, and the next day, oh God, am I doing the right thing? And it's like that. So learning to observe that with equanimity and love is the third foundation of mindfulness.
Okay, awareness is the portal.
Awareness, right?
Thank you.
And I always say this, it's how I live my life. It is so remarkable, this mysterious awareness. Where does it come from? We don't have the least idea, and we never will. Right? They're not going to make some machine which is conscious. They're not going to grow something in a petri dish which has this. And it's right here. It's not, we don't, all our meditation will do, in the quote end, is it'll make us be just here. Here knowing that we're here. So strange, isn't it? There was a hand somewhere over there, please. Great. Yay.
In my experience, when those dukkha's pop up and you're in a place of shock, surprise, hurt, and anger, I've always, since even as a child, thought that those were the most opportune times for compassion and opportunities, the word that just keeps ringing in my ear today, that anytime you're faced with a challenge on whatever level, that you're given that grace to have the opportunity for compassion in its greatest form.
Kate? We'll have kids soon.
The thing that has happened over the last 6 years for me is that what I'm finding is a need to act a whole lot less. When something comes in, there's a growing awareness that fixed views, my opinions, are a result of conditioning. All the things that have happened up to this point. And the same is true for everyone else. So when somebody is behaving badly or is being self-destructive, I can see those seeds in myself. I remember them real clearly, like yesterday and this morning. And knowing that, I feel less inclined to have judgments about what needs to be fixed and to really try and see into their heart and just offer them that. And a lot of the times, just doing nothing is a powerful statement of love.
Thanks, Katie. Well, I'd like to close with a poem. Hafiz, 15th century or so Sufi. It happens all the time in heaven, and someday it will begin to happen again here on earth. that men and women who give each other light often will get down on their knees and with tears in their eyes will sincerely speak, saying, "My dear, how can I be more loving to you? How can I be more kind?" Come on in. And if we include this that we take as ourselves in that, it happens all the time in heaven, and someday it will begin to happen again on earth. That men and women who give each other light often will get down on their knees before themselves, and with tears in their eyes will sincerely speak, saying, "My dear, how can I be more loving to you? How can I be more kind?"